heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 330, covering the week of October 17th through October 21st, 2022. Glad to have you back in the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Facebook page, like our Gab page, like our YouTube page. You can find all those social media accounts by just looking at Abbeville Institute. So you can find them on our webpage as well, abbevilleinstitute.org. That's A-B-B-E-V-I-L-L-E, institute.org. While you're at our website, give us an email address. We'll give you a free ebook exploring the Southern tradition. You also are going to get on our email list, which is a great way for us to contact you and let you know about things that are coming up. We also have our daily dose of Dixie through that, where you get articles Monday through Friday, stuff from the website. And I want to talk about, just quickly, we have our next conference set. This is our conference. This is an in-person meeting, right? And it's going to be a lot of fun. It's our 20th anniversary event. So if you're listening to this podcast, 20th anniversary event, April 13th through 16th, 2023, at Callaway Gardens in Pine Mountain, Georgia. It's going to be a fantastic time. Details, of course, are forthcoming. We're going to put out an announcement within the next day or so. And so you can start reserving your rooms and getting there. Also, of course, signing up. We will have a schedule closer to the event, but we are looking at bringing in some really great people to speak. So it is going to be a fun time. And Callaway Gardens is just a beautiful place. It exemplifies the Southern tradition in so many ways. If you've never been there before, it is a must attend event. I mean, Callaway Gardens is someplace. It's a resort. It's a destination. It's not just a place you go and it's a hotel. It is one of the most beautiful places in the South. So, and it's going to be in the spring when all the azaleas are blooming. It's just really, really beautiful, and it's a private nature reserve. So it's just so great. And anybody that hears this and you want to have a nice little mid-April vacation, a couple of days, and get some great material, meet like-minded people, you're going to want to attend that 20th anniversary event. So April 13th through 16, 2023, mark it on your calendars. Details forthcoming. They will be on the website under the events section, which is in the middle of the page, but you'll also get an email about that. And we're also going to start putting up there all the forthcoming events that we have, so you can start planning to attend these, whether they're webinars or whether they're conferences. We are going to have a summer school again this year, probably in July. It will not be in South Carolina, but we haven't locked down the place yet, so we're close, but I can't say anything about that until we do. So that will also be coming up. And then just all kinds of great things. The webinars are fun. We had the webinar last week on Robert E. Lee, which was great. And we have one that we're working on in January already. It's going to be a much more substantial webinar as well. So there are good things happening at the Institute. And if you really like what we do, consider that tax-deductible donation to the Abbeville Institute. That's how we make all these things possible, right? So the webinars, for example, the website is extensive and not cheap because of the amount of work we have to do with it. And of course, that always costs money, and organization of things, videos, conferences, all of this stuff costs money. And so if you do appreciate the Institute, if everybody that was on our email list, for example, gave us $50 a year, we would be in fantastic financial shape all the time. We could do all kinds of things. And it's just a matter of that $50 a year. I mean, can you give less than $5 a month to the Institute? Heck, you can't even get a dozen donuts for under $12. So is it worth it to you to give $4 or $5 a month essentially to the Abbeville Institute just to help us do all these things that we do? A lot of people give money, and we do appreciate any money you can contribute. If it's $60, if it's $50, if it's $25, if it's $500. Of course, we love the larger donations too. They do help quite a bit. But if you are making preparations for taxes at the end of the year, it is tax deductible to the full extent of the law. So please consider that tax deductible donation. Things like our app, which you can download. We are working on the Apple problem. That should be straightened out within about, I would say, less than a week. We'll have it back up there, hopefully So there was an issue with something with that. So we're working on that. But we have our mobile app. We have our YouTube channels, Invaluable. All of that's free. Think about all the free stuff you get from the Abbeville Institute, and your donations help cover that. We are coming up again at the end of the year, and I'll talk more about donating as we keep going. So these are things that are important, and your donations help the website, right? And the website is the thing that people see the most. And so we run 5 articles a week, and the articles are a nice expression of what the Institute does. We've got over 3,000 articles now on the website, hundreds of lectures. All of that's free. All of that is free to the public. So it's important to get these things, right? We also have our Abbeville Academy. If you've missed any of these webinars, you want to pick them up, you can go to abbevilleacademy.org and get those. Also click on the shop tab. You can get our logo on high quality embroidered logo on polo shirts and hats and things like that. So it's a nice way to advertise the Institute. And, as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Give it that 5-star review. Leave it a text review. Also, if you're on YouTube, comment. And we appreciate it. Share our material around social media. We are back on Facebook, so if you want to use that, you can. We're going to try to make a more concerted effort to do more with social media, Facebook, Twitter, Gab. We've paused on that for a little while because we're figuring out what to do with that. But regardless, these are things that are important. And Facebook, a lot of our audience is in the age bracket that uses Facebook more than anything else. So we're going to get back into using Facebook much more extensively, though we probably won't use it the same way we did before. So, but if you are on Facebook, share our material on Facebook. Share it around, right? And share it with your friends. Click the little share button on the articles that we're going to start putting up there. So the links, that's a great way to get the material out there. All right. Well, let's talk about the material for the week. And it has a lot to do with, again, perceptions of the South. One of the things that we are concerned with at the Institute all the time, and our mission is to explore what's true and valuable in the Southern tradition, and that's based on the idea that there is a perception of the South, that the South is this evil other in America. It's the antithesis of what America was and is. It's always been the place that has been the deviation from the norm in America. And the South is the peculiar other in American society. It doesn't matter if it's now or 150 years ago or 200 years ago. It's the strange place. And what we've tried to show throughout all the years, and we've been doing this podcast now for, about 7 years, I guess. It's hard to, I think almost we're coming up on 8 years on doing the podcast. 330 episodes. That's about 330 weeks, right? We've also had some time off, but 330 weeks, finishing up 7 years. We'll be starting on our 8th year next year. We still have a number of weeks left, but in this year. But we've got a lot of stuff, right? And we've talked about this since the beginning. The South is America. The South was America. There are, of course, other Americas. There's New England. But generally, when people thought about the United States, they thought about the South. It was that image of the South that stuck in their mind the longest, until you get to a period of time where the North becomes ascendant. And then the image became the money-grubbing Yankee, right? I mean, these are stereotypes, I know, and not everyone in the North is a Yankee, and not everyone in the South is not a Yankee, right? So we've got Yankees everywhere. But the image of America was David Crockett and this fierce independence, George Washington. Daniel Boone, though he was from Pennsylvania, spent most of his life in the South. The South often claims him, Kentucky, Missouri. But you have, Andrew Jackson is an image of America for a long time. Jacksonian period, right? Thomas Jefferson. You don't find that as much with Northerners until you get to the middle of the 19th century. And then it becomes the industrialists, the businessmen, of course, Abraham Lincoln, who, by the way, was born in Kentucky, but lived most of his life in the Midwest and, by default, the North. So you have this image of America that shifts in the middle of the 19th century. It moves away from the South and then becomes much more Northern dominated. Though for a long time, even Southerners like Robert E. Lee were still recognized by people in Europe and elsewhere as being some of the most important and noble Americans. Winston Churchill said that about Lee. And so the Southern tradition and the Southern view of America was still very important, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And what we're seeing now is a reaction to that. And I think that's the important thing, right? Reconciliation is over. Reconciliation is over. It's been over for, I would say, a long time, but it really is over now. There's the other side of this coin, which is we're exploring what's true and valuable in the Southern tradition because we're being confronted by people that say there's nothing valuable in it. The other side of it are anti-reconciliationists. And in fact, back in the early 20th century, there was a historian named, well, not early, but mid-20th century, a historian named Avery Craven. And Avery Craven was criticized for being extremely pro-Southern when he wrote histories. His Coming of the Civil War is one of those masterpiece works on the sectional conflict and sectional period, right, the antebellum period. And Craven's response to that was, well, look, what you all have been doing for years is simply just portraying the war from the Northern standpoint. We're at least giving the South an ear and allowing them to speak for themselves and taking what they say seriously. We're not just going and looking at the war from one position. We're looking at it from all the positions. And if the Southern position sounds like it's stronger, well, we're just letting them speak for themselves. And so this is important to note. Nothing has changed. It's just that the people that are now in positions of power have decided they're going to become radical Republicans. And it doesn't matter if they're on the left or the right. That's what they've decided they're going to become. And the radical Republican view of American history, the radical Republican view of the sectional conflict, the radical Republican view of the war, is now the dominant view of the period. This is what Eric Foner wanted, and it's why he called Reconstruction the unfinished revolution, because he wanted the revolution to be finished. He wanted it to go on, and we can have a longer revolution, right? And we can keep it going. We can have a second, third, fourth, fifth Reconstruction. We just need to finish the work of Reconstruction. And if we finish the work of Reconstruction, that means there are no Confederate monuments, there are no Confederate symbols, there are no Southerners who are worthy of emulation in that period of time. We can talk about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, but even there we have to contextualize who they are because they, of course, were Southern and they had slaves and they had views that don't fit with modern society. By the way, neither did many Northerners in the 19th century, which people do know, right? I mean, Abraham Lincoln, Benjamin Wade, these are pretty racist people if we're going to call people racist. These people would have racial views that aren't in line with modern American society. But we're going to overlook that because they're on the right side of things. Or if you look at George Thomas, William Sherman even. We'll talk about Sherman today. William Tecumseh Sherman, right? William Sherman had views on race that were not in line with modern society. And so that's the issue now. We're facing a period of the end of reconciliation. And maybe one day people will look back on this and say, gosh, these people went absolutely nuts. The stuff they're proposing now is absolutely nuts. And there are a lot of things going on here. So first, let's start with the nutty stuff, which is the piece by Jack Marquardt, one of our resident scholars in Japan, on Monday, Never the Twain. And it talks about the Naming Commission and the recommendations from the Naming Commission, which was created by Congress and, of course, approved by a large majority of Republicans. When I say that the Republican Party is no friend to the South, it never really has been. Well, this is true if you just look at what happened with the Naming Commission. And so the Naming Commission produces their report, and they have a number of changes they wish to make, taking the name off Fort Benning or Fort Bragg. But the one that I think is the most outrageous and by far the most destructive is tearing down essentially the Confederate monument in Arlington Cemetery. Now, if you read the Naming Commission report, they're actually charged they cannot remove anything that's a headstone, right? A grave marker. They wouldn't do that. Well, this monument is a grave marker. Ezekiel Moses, who sculpted the monument, is buried right there underneath it. And they even recognize, well, not to disturb the graves, we have to put scaffolding up over this thing so that we can take it down and not disturb the graves. So then if that's the case, and you don't want to disturb the graves, would that not mean that it's a grave marker? It may not have, they're going to get very technical. Well, it doesn't have Moses Ezekiel's name on it. So it's not like it's a headstone. But it's in a Confederate section of Arlington, a small section, right? There are not that many Confederates buried at Arlington. But some people are, like Moses Ezekiel, who designed the monument. And so this would be a desecration of a grave. Doesn't matter, because they want it gone. And they want it gone, and they say it very clearly, because these bronze reliefs do not properly tell the story of the war. So what we've got now are a bunch of dopes like Ty Seidule, who's on the committee, deciding what the proper quote-unquote interpretation of the war is. Well, I think the people that designed the monument, and the people that, Moses Ezekiel and others, knew what the proper interpretation of the war was, at least from their position. And so why should we take that monument down? This is one that is the most egregious. We were told over and over again, we're not going to touch monuments in cemeteries. We're not going to touch monuments in museums. We're not going to do any of that. We're not taking care of it. And the commission, well, we were good people. We didn't take anything out of museums. Nothing in museums is going to be changed. Oh, we might want to contextualize these things more, but we're not going to take anything out of museums. And when they talk about taking down, now, Seidule wants to bulldoze the thing down to where there's nothing there. But so the compromise, so to speak, was that most of the monument would stay up, but they're going to take off all the bronze reliefs. When they take them off, they're not going to go put them in a museum. They're going to melt them down. They're just gone. That's the whole point. This is the grossest use of federal power over a cultural piece of American history I've ever seen. And it's laughable because the arguments being made about it are just plain stupid. Or the fact that they're going to change a couple of names of ships like the Buchanan and the Maury because, well, those people had fought for the Confederacy or favored the Confederacy, whatever it is. Even though Franklin Buchanan was an important part of the American Navy, and so was Matthew Fontaine Maury, the scientist of the seas, who we wouldn't have oceanography without Matthew Fontaine Maury. But you know what? He was a Confederate, so we can't have him around. Or how about changing the name of the USS Chancellorsville? We can't have that either. Why? Because that was a Confederate victory. This is how stupid these people are. And like I said, reconciliation is over. It's over, clearly over, because they want to erase anything that they can that has any kind of hint of the Confederacy. Whereas in reconciliation, these things were recognized as being a valuable part of American society. Southerners were a valuable part of the American polity. And so it's important to keep them and include them in this discussion of military bases and the American military history. We know the Army, the largest group in the Army, I mean, it's a plurality, but the largest group in the Army are Southerners, white male Southerners. Still to this day, Southerners serve in the Army in larger numbers than anyone else. And of course, also the other branches of the military service as well. So it's really amazing to me how this is happening. But there is some hope. I mean, there's been some discussion about this behind the scenes. One, the Naming Commission says that the Defense Department only has to wait till December 18th, I think it was, to implement these rules. There is some hope that there could be a delaying tactic to get it through the beginning of the first Congress, which would be January of 2023. The next Congress, January of 2023. And if the Republicans can take control of the Congress, maybe they could stop some of these things, like the tearing down of the Arlington Monument. I'm not so certain that's going to be the case. I'm not so certain the Republicans would go and not go forward with the recommendations. Though, if enough people raise a stink about this, they might. I'm not certain, how that's going to play out, but it is something to think about. If you want to contact your representative, particularly if they're a Republican, and say, look, I need you to stop this. This is cultural destruction that they're doing. It's an egregious affront to the spirit of reconciliation, which, again, William McKinley, who who was president of the United States, was a war veteran, Union War veteran, and he's the one that advocated for a monument in Arlington Cemetery, a Confederate monument in Arlington Cemetery. It was his idea. A Union veteran who had been shot at by Southerners thought this is a pretty good idea to have this. There's no question that this is another attempt by the other side to win the culture war, right? In their opinion, the South has dominated the United States long enough, and it needs to go away. Now, I can look around the United States and say the South really doesn't do anything, right? I mean, the Southern tradition is nowhere to be found other than local communities, and this is what we've always said, think about those things. Think about those things first, local communities, local government. That's how you really create an environment where you can actually win and do things as you cultivate local. But there are bigger picture, and this is one of them. But I bring up that local because of the piece on Tuesday by Sarah Sass entitled Carpetbaggers. And this is a real problem with these monuments. What we're seeing with the monuments that are being attacked, oftentimes the people attacking them are not native to that area. They've moved in. We saw it in Richmond. The reason the monuments came down in Richmond is because you had a lot of people moving into Richmond from places outside of Richmond, and they really didn't care about the monuments. They didn't care about Jackson and Lee. They don't care about any of that. This is just whatever they're told in school. These people are evil. They're racist. They fought for racism. They fought for slavery, whatever it is. And so they have to come down. And this the outside influence that's really a problem here. And that's why I wanted to publish this piece by Sarah Sass, because she brings up this demographic shift. You're having a lot of people shuffle into the South from other parts of the United States, and they're changing it. I mean, we all see it happening, right? Atlanta's different today than it was, even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, definitely. Same thing with places like places in North Carolina, places in Virginia. These places are changing because of a demographic shift, and it's a demographic shift often from the north to the south. South Carolina in Charleston is getting abused by Northerners. When I say abused, they're driving up the price of houses. They're coming in with a lot of money, and so they're becoming an economic and political force in the city of Charleston. And this, in fact, leads into the poem that we published on Friday entitled Shermanized. You see, what these carpetbaggers are in many ways is just another extension of the Reconstruction process. We know during Reconstruction you had people moving into the South, whether they were there for profit or political profit. Doesn't matter, actually financial or political profit. They were moving in large numbers, and they were settling in the South. They weren't from the South, and the effort was to transform the South, and we know this has happened. We know it's happened because of monuments and symbols and other things. We know that these governments have been transformed. We know the culture is being eroded. Now, of course, next year at our 20th anniversary event, we're going to have a very positive outlook on this and what does the Southern tradition mean for the 21st century, and there's a lot to say for it. And I think even Sarah Sass had some things to say about it in Carpetbaggers and what can be done. But Shermanized is a nice poem. It's written by L. Virginia French. It was written about the destruction of Atlanta. It was actually read in Atlanta on May 1st, 1866. And it is a beautiful, defiant poem. She said, "And forevermore hereafter, where the fierce destroyer reigns, where destruction pours her lava over cultivated plains, where want and woe hold carnival, where bitter blight and blood sweep over prosperous nations in a strong relentless flood, where the golden crown of harvest trodden into ashes lies, and desolation stares abroad with famine frenzied eyes, where the wrong with iron scepter crushes every right we prized, there shall people groan in anguish. God, the right is Shermanized." Right? So anytime you have been destroyed, we're going to use the word Shermanized. And she finishes saying, "God bless our noble Georgia, though her soil was overrun, and her lands in desolation laid beneath the autumn sun. With a single shout to action, like the boom of signal guns, she has roused the iron metal of her strong and stalwart sons. May her daughters aid that effort to rebuild and to restore, working on for Southern freedom as they never worked before. May Georgia as a laggard never once be stigmatized, and her people, press and pulpit, nevermore be Shermanized, right? So we should start using this phrase when we're talking about Reconstruction or this new movement to end reconciliation. This is Shermanizing something. Now, the one side will love it because they love Sherman. They think it's great that the South was completely obliterated. That's fantastic. But it used to have this dripping, this seething drip from it. And I want to bridge that into the last two things that I can talk about very briefly here on this episode. And that would be the piece on Douglas Southall Freeman. It was from our 2000 and, let's see, what year was this? I can't remember now off the top of my head. 2011 summer school by Jonathan White. And Douglas Southall Freeman is one of these figures now that is vilified because he was pro-Robert E. Lee. This was in the spirit of reconciliation. He wrote his Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of Lee in the 1930s. He was no professional academic. He was a newspaperman. But the book is fantastic, and now everything that is written tries to refute Douglas Southall Freeman, or the books, I should say. Everything tries to refute Douglas Southall Freeman. And you know what? They have a hard time doing it. Freeman was comprehensive. He said it was going to be the biography of Robert E. Lee, and it is. It still is to this day, almost 100 years later. It still is the biography of Robert E. Lee. And Lee, again, was the symbol of reconciliation. It's why he has to go. And so when you have this wonderful essay, this lecture by Jonathan White talking about what Freeman provided for the United States, not just for the South, but for the United States, how important it was to have somebody speak for the South in this time. I mean, it's a tremendous thing. And I like that he mentions all of Freeman's career, not just writing Lee, but the good and the bad of Freeman, the things that you can say, well, Freeman may have been correct on this or that, critics of Freeman, his interesting positions on race, which are often brought out. Freeman was a racist, yet on the other hand, he was a progressive, as White says. He had the views of the day on race because of America generally held these views, Americans overall. But not just that, he also did think that there were abuses taking place in the South for black Americans, black Southerners, and those needed to be rectified. And he used the newspaper that he edited to do it at times. I mean, this is a man who was certainly someone who thought that there could be improvements in the South. But he loved the Southern tradition. He thought Lee embodied that Southern tradition. And I think that in so many ways, this is another tearing down Freeman, tearing down Lee is this part of Shermanizing things, right? This is where tearing down the Arlington Monument. This is what it's all about. Arlington, of course, being Lee's home. And Douglas Southall Freeman has to go too. Now, on the flip side of that, we have Northern complicity, Northern studies. And I mentioned at the beginning of this, the problem is not, when we say we explore what's true and valuable in the Southern tradition, the problem is not the South. It's the attacks on the South that force a reaction, and a defense, or an explanation, or an exploration. But the real odd people in America have never been Southerners. Southerners are recognized as the real Americans. The real odd people have always been Northerners. And we have a two-part lecture from last year's summer school, or I should say this year's summer school. It was last summer school, 2022 in July. Don Livingston giving two parts on how the North prolonged and profited from slavery. This is a Northern Studies couple of lectures, and we will produce the next one next week, and we'll have the follow-up to it. But these Northern studies are essential because it tears away this idea of a virtuous North. It's a counterfeit virtue. It's a myth. It's the Lincolnian myth, and Don Livingston does a great job with it. Of course, if you haven't, his lectures on YouTube for the Institute are the most viewed lectures. He's very good at presenting this case, and he tears away that substantial myth that's there about the supposedly righteous North against the evil South. And what's amazing about that is there are people that are now, who are at least being honest, they're starting to recognize this and talk about it too. And then what they're doing with that is saying, okay, well, yeah, you're right. We'll just change all that stuff. See, we'll self-reflect and we'll get rid of it in the North, but you have to get rid of it in the South too. We're going to contextualize. We're going to take stuff down. We're going to do things here in the North because we are just good, self-righteous Northerners, and we have this treasury of virtue, and so we're going to do it, and that means you have to do it too. So yeah, you're right. We were racist, but we'll admit it, and you just won't admit it. And that's kind of the position that they're in with that. I'm not so certain that's entirely the case where they're willing to do this, or there's shock and awe and surprise. Oh my gosh, Northerners were part of slavery. Northerners were part of Jim Crow. Northerners? No, not Northern, because it's the Lincolnian myth. Only the South is the odd. This is where I've said before that the 1619 Project, even though we're working on our own project, the 1607 Project, which is going to be better, but with the 1619 Project, at least is honest about some of these things, whereas the conservatives in America are not, and that if you do believe in the proposition nation, then the 1619 Project is actually more honest about the failings of America than anything. And the Lincolnian myth, if we have that, then there was an unfinished revolution. There was a promise not met. And this is where the conservatives who try to get on board with Sherman, Grant, Lincoln, they're just digging their own graves. Because that revolution will consume them too. It has to. And it really is a communist revolution in a lot of ways. It's a cultural Marxist revolution. The idea is leveling. I mean, this is the point, right? So it will consume them too, and they just don't see it. They're just blind to it because they don't want to have the baggage of the South, right? The South is baggage. This is what I'm saying. They view it this way. Even the Christian nationalists now, who are calling themselves Christian nationalists, are certainly interested in a northern view of America. And so if you have the baggage of the South, well, that creates problems, even though, as I said at the beginning of the show, the South was and is the view of America. So we've got a lot of good stuff this week, a lot of things to go through. The piece on Freeman is long. The lecture from Don Livingston is 45 minutes. It's worth your time to listen to it. And then, of course, the other pieces, which all fit into that general theme of the destruction of reconciliation, which is what we're facing for the future. All right. Until next time, good day.